Hey there, friend. I am so excited to have you here today. I have an amazing interview to share with you. This with my friend, Misty Doyle. And you are going to love this episode. Misty has so many great things to teach us, and she's also written a book, which you'll hear about during the episode as well. But before we get to all that, I did want to read to you a review that we received at God's Power Stories. The title is Charming and Refreshing, and it reads like this. GPS is proving to be a very digestible, applicable, and refreshing little corner of the podcasting world. Anna's take on weaving the Bible into the everyday human experience is research-rich while still being approachable to all. How lovely an opportunity it is to experience such a warm and sincere offering of fellowship and insight to a text so pivotal but often so challenging to truly understand. And I really appreciate that review. In fact, I appreciate every review we've received. And if you haven't yet left a review for God's Power Stories, would you do that today? Just head over to Apple Podcasts. It's quick, it's easy, and it's oh so meaningful, not just to me, but to anybody who's trying to figure out if GPS is for them. Thanks. On to the story. Does God seem hateful to you, like he's looking for ways to trip you up? Does the thought of opening his word seem daunting and intimidating? Hi, I'm Anna, your host for God's Power Stories, where we connect with God's love through the power of his stories. I believe that God loves us more than we can comprehend, and we experience that love through stories. If you're here to connect through stories about the power of God, with the wind of the Holy Spirit at your back, you're in the right place. Let's let God light our path so we can take that next step toward the fullness of life he has planned for us. Grab your cup of coffee, that Diet Coke, or flavored water. Breathe. Let's dig in to God's Power Stories. So I am so excited to be able to introduce a friend to you named Misty Doyle. She and her husband live in southern Indiana with their 4 kids. She is the librarian at an elementary school, and she's also a women's event speaker. She leads a group called Mothers in Waiting, and it's a group for women facing infertility. She also serves on the board of Free to Be, a faith-based nonprofit dedicated to equipping and empowering women. And when she's not writing or teaching, she loves reading and pretending that her house is clean. And I so identify with that last line especially.
Right.
Wouldn't that be nice?
It would be. It would be.
Right. Okay. Well, Misty, thank you so much for joining us today. I got a chance to hear your story this last summer. And I had a hard time holding it together because there were things in your story that I had never experienced, but there were things in your story that I had experienced. Mm-hmm. So I just wonder if you could fill in the listeners on your story and how God has met you there.
Of course. First of all, thank you for having me. It is an honor to be here. My father, years ago, was diagnosed with cancer, and we had people in our lives diagnosed. I'd had people in my life who had died, but it's different when it's someone really, really close to you. And so even during his diagnosis, I started grieving in a way that I had never experienced before. My family, our immediate family, we all started grieving. And what was unique is I noticed we were all grieving differently. He did pass. We squeezed 7 years out of that. Lots of procedures, surgeries, all the things. But ultimately, God chose to heal him in heaven. And when he died, that night, several of us were there at hospice in the room. And our responses, even in that moment, were so unique and different. I surprised myself. I didn't plan this. I started clapping and I said, Daddy's in heaven. He's in heaven. And I was so happy for him. My nephew fell to the floor. He was sobbing. My sisters were quiet. And my mom just stood there. And I think knowing for years we had braced ourselves for this, it just felt like closure. And she was quiet. And then she said, I'm ready to go. I need someone to take me home. In that moment, I wasn't thinking about this, but now, years later, looking back, I think, whose response was right? Whose response was wrong? The answer is neither. We all grieve differently, even that night, as our responses were so unique. That journey, that grief journey of loss, of losing someone and feeling like there is a giant hole in my heart now. We all responded differently and we all responded on different timelines. And so I really started writing about my grief as just a therapy for me. It was really good for me to just get all those feelings up and out. But in conversations with my sister and my mom and our immediate family, we all started realizing this is so unique to each individual. At one point, my mother said, should I still be feeling this way? And I said, well, who wrote the manual on grief? Who
Mm.
tells us how to grieve? And then I really started kind of digging in and reading books about grief and really looking at, well, how do we view grief? And I think our culture sort of teaches us, oh, there's this checklist and there's this timeline and denial and shock and acceptance at the end. We learn how to ride a bike, we learn how to read, we learn all these things growing up, but no one sits down and says, this is the correct way to grieve.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like our culture sort of, with writing without writing it, read between the lines, they sort of impress on us that this is how you should grieve. I was speaking to a friend one night on the phone, just having a really hard time, and she said, Misty, grief is not a checklist. You need to let go of that. You're not going to feel angry. And then when you're done, oh, well, you're never going to feel angry again. And something in me really changed that night when she said that, because I thought, oh my goodness, that's what I needed to hear. That's the permission I needed. And so I was reading, you can read a story in the Bible a lot. And growing up in church, I've heard this story a lot. But when I read Luke 24 through the lens of grief, I read it really differently. And so I'm going to paraphrase a little. I won't read it all,
Sure.
but in Luke 24, two of the followers of Jesus are walking from Jerusalem to Emmaus. And as they're walking, Jesus joins them, but they don't know that it's him.
And he's already been
Yeah.
hung on the cross.
Yes, the context is he's died, he's risen, they don't know, all of that. And so they don't know that it's him. And he, again, paraphrase, he says, why are you sad? What's going on? And they kind of respond a little salty, which I appreciate. Are you the only one who doesn't know? Like, I feel like they said, seriously, bro, where you been? Like, you don't know all the things. And they start to explain to him. And a verse that really stood out is, we had thought he was the Messiah. Another version says, we had hoped he was the Messiah. And the whole time they're walking, it's a 7-mile journey. The whole time they're walking, he's listening. He's letting them share. And so as I'm reading this through the lens of grief, I'm thinking he's letting them be disappointed. He's letting them be maybe angry. He's letting them grieve. At the very end, when they sit down, they say, oh, come in, let's eat. Don't keep going on your journey. They sit down, they break bread, and then he's revealed to them. He was with them the whole time. He was with them that whole long journey. And God really used that story to minister, to change, to expand my view of grief. I felt like I now had permission to walk my journey in the time that I needed, in the way that I needed, to not rush. Jesus didn't say, hurry up, let's get to the house, or I got to keep going. He didn't say, stop being sad. He just listened. I think this story gives us permission to grieve. And so that's when I started writing, with the intent of, if I need to hear this, how many other people grieving need to hear this too? And so that's where Grief is More Than Gray really came about, because I thought, I don't want a manual for grief. I want an unmanual. I want to push us out of the box of grief and let people know you grieve in the way that you need for as long as you need. So that's really where the book started. And of course, my limited thinking, I thought this is going to be a book about grieving someone who has died. Fast forward a few years, my father died in 2015. In 2016, I had twins, and they were a surprise. And they're wonderful, and we love them, and they're fabulous. But as they started growing, I noticed that Emmy was meeting some milestones on time, and Jack was not. And that set me on a new path of grief and expanded even more that you can grieve someone who is dead, but you can also grieve someone who is living. And so as I'm starting to grieve Jack, again, I kind of felt like, am I doing this right? Should I be grieving? He's here. There are worse things than he was ultimately diagnosed with autism. He has a developmental delay and a speech and language impairment. There's a lot of therapies, a lot of work, a lot of special ed meetings that are a part of my life that I didn't think would be a part of my life. So as I'm grieving, I'm thinking, should I be? Is it okay? And again, God's like, yes, yes, this is okay. And so the book really evolved. And so I try to weave in daddy's diagnosis, I weave in his death, and I also weave in Jack and his diagnosis. And I give people permission to grieve someone who's alive.
When your father passed away, was it the first close person that you had that had passed away?
Yes and no. Almost all of my grandparents had died at that point, and those were hard, but I was younger. I don't think I fully grasped grief in that moment. I was 10 and my cousin died. She was 12. I would say that was more impactful than even my grandparents. Really wrestling as a child with why did she die? She's so young. I think as a child, grandparents are old and old people die. That's how I reasoned it. But my cousin was young, and watching her battle cancer and then ultimately dying, the impact it had on her family and our family, that was really hard for me. And I write about it in the book, just not knowing what to say to her sister, not knowing how to help someone. I remember feeling at a loss for words. I remember feeling at the funeral home, I don't know what to say to you. I don't know how to help you. So her death was pretty impactful, but daddy's death, that was that was a whole new boat. That was a whole new boat that I did not want to be in.
The thing that really resonated with me hearing your story both a few months ago and then again today is I always thought about my own mother because my mother also was in hospice and she was in hospice for 7 years
Oh, wow.
before she passed away. So it was one of those things that I had kind of gotten to the point of wanting to believe that she was never going to die. She was going to outlive all of us.
Yep.
And even in the last hours of her life, I didn't want to believe that she was actually going to
Mm,
die. And we had gone to see her. We had spent pretty much the whole evening with her that last night of life, my husband and I. And at one point, the caregivers came in and said, "Can you excuse us for a minute? We want to get her ready for bed." So, we went out into
yeah.
another area with my dad. And they changed her into her PJs. And during that time, they came out and their faces were like, their eyes were as huge as saucers and
Hmm.
said, "Have you gotten a chance to talk with her?" And I said, "No, like, she's been out of it. Her eyes were open, but they were fixed on heaven. And she was
Yeah.
not responding to anything anybody was saying and hadn't for hours."
Mm,
And they said that when they went to change her clothes into her pajamas, they just went to turn back to her and she was looking right at them.
mm,
And she said, "What are you doing?" And they said, "We're just getting you ready for bed, Betty. We just want to make you comfortable." And she said, "Oh, all right then." And then she was gone again. So I was like, "Oh, why couldn't I have been
yep.
there for that second?" I wanted to be there so bad
Yes.
to talk to her. It's like you want to talk to him one more time. You want to tell
I
him
know.
one more time
I
that you love
know.
him.
I know.
And we stayed there, I think, until about 11 that night. And I do remember saying to my mom, "Mom, we love you, I'm from a family of 6 kids, and I said, we are all going to see you on the other side,
Absolutely.
and we're going to take care of dad, and it's okay for you to go.
Yep.
And I kissed her, and my husband kissed her, and we left. And I woke up at about 1:30 in the morning, and I checked my phone, and there were no messages on it. And so to keep her from dying, I turned on the do not disturb because I thought to myself, if they can't get
If
a
I do
hold of
this,
me,
yeah,
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 she won't die.
perfect reasoning.
Right. So apparently about 3:30 is when she had passed away. And
Okay.
we ended up getting a call from my brother-in-law saying they were trying to get a hold of Anna, but they didn't get a hold of her, so they called us instead. And I'm going, I feel awful. But
Well,
just knowing my mom, I don't think she would have wanted to die if we had been sitting there by her side.
yes,
So I
yes.
just think that it all happens for a reason. And I so resonate with what you're saying. I was thinking back just in hearing your story about in the Bible times, like let's say, for instance, when Moses died
Hmm.
and all of Israel grieved. And after about 30 days, in fact, it was probably exactly 30 days, they were like, God was like, or Joshua was like, hey, we've grieved Moses,
Hmm.
onward. But one of the
Yes,
things I think about the Bible is when they grieved, they sat and
yes.
grieved, and that's all they did. And I think
Hmm.
in the society that we're in now, something happens that we need to grieve, but we have all these other things to
Yes,
do.
yes.
And so it takes us a lot longer to
Hmm.
get to the point of cleansing that these people were able to experience in 30 days because they
Yes.
focus specifically on the grieving.
Yes, I have a friend in my writing group, and she's from Ghana, West Africa. And she shared with me, and I put a little snippet in the book that when someone dies in their culture, it is expected, like her father died, and her mother was expected to host. People would come and go for weeks, weeks to her home to grieve with her. And my first thought was, what? Well, I don't want people coming in and out and in and out. But then I thought maybe I would, because the funeral in America is so rushed. Everybody's there, they're just filing through. We had hundreds of people at daddy's funeral. You feel like you need to talk to everyone and connect and thank them. And then it's over and everybody goes back to their normal lives. But our lives were rocked and nothing felt normal. And then I almost felt a little like, surreal. Like, how do you just go back to your life? How are you continuing to work and be normal? My life is not normal. Maybe I would want to sit in my home for weeks and just be sad and sit in my PJs and drink tea and cry with friends. I think our culture has grief wrong in a lot of ways.
So, your book, you talk about both your father's death and also your child, Jack.
Hmm.
And you had shared a story this summer about Jack and the kids at school.
Hmm.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I will put out a disclaimer. I cry when I talk about Jack, and I don't apologize for that. I stopped apologizing when I cry a few years ago. I feel like crying is an emotion and it's healthy and it's good to get it up and out. And so if I cry, I cry. So Jack was nonverbal for several years in the beginning. That's actually one of the biggest signs we saw that we knew, hey, we think he should be evaluated. He wasn't walking. He only said just a few words and they were not consistent. So we had him evaluated and they came to do, speech therapy once a week. I work at a Christian school and it is wonderful because I get to talk about Jesus. And the little kids come in. It's a K through 6 school and they all rotate. At the time, I was teaching technology. And so they all rotate through the lab and they all have their little prayer requests, pray for my dead cat and pray for my grandma. She broke her hip, all the things. So they all come in and we start the class with prayer. And one week, he was just heavy. Jack was just heavy on my heart. And I thought, hundreds of kids come through here every week and they share their prayer requests with me. And we pray right then for that. I'm going to share mine. I'm going to give them, something personal and share part of my life. And so I started to share with every class about Jack. And when I would share, you could see their eyes really take it in that my son wasn't speaking and they knew that he should be. And so they would ask, what words does he say? And why doesn't he talk? And so it led to really, really beautiful conversations. But one conversation particularly was a little squirrely first grade boy. And, I just shared with the class, Jack isn't speaking. And so I pray for you guys and your needs. And so I'm asking you, can you pray for Jack to start saying more words? So we did, we prayed and it was beautiful and wonderful. And, this little guy raised his hand. He's like, he's just going to start saying all these words. I bet you he's just going to start talking, and he is just so confident. And I laughed. I was like, yep, you never know. Within a week, Jack started saying more words within a week. And I went to pick him up from preschool and he was there at the door. And when I went to pick him up, the teacher said, he's been at the door and he's been saying, Mom, Mom, Mom. And the reason that's so meaningful is because he did not say mom. And that's something I shared with them because when they're asking, what does he say? And I said, well, he says, bye. And he says more. He signs more. He, of course, says dad, of course. But he doesn't say mom. And they're little, you could see their hearts sink. How can a child not say mom? And so it was really, really special for me that within a week of me asking these kids to pray, their faith was so big. And I did have faith, but I had hesitant faith. I had guarded faith because for a few years, I just had felt, to be honest, I felt disappointed in some of God's choices. And I told him that regularly. I don't know that he cared, but I did tell God, I'm a little salty. I'm a little disappointed right now. And so I had this guarded faith, like, you can do it, but you might not, because you could have healed my dad and you didn't. And you could heal Jack, but you're not. And so I was really struggling with my faith in that moment. He started to say, Mom. And of course, I come back to the kids and I say, you guys, he's saying mom. He's saying mom. And the classes are cheering and they're clapping and they're like, well, he's going to say more words. He's going to say more words. And I had teachers emailing me and saying, we have a prayer board in the room and nobody wants to put anything on the board but Jack. I had moms stopping me in the hallway and with tears in their eyes saying, we're praying. We're praying for your son every night because my kid says he has to say more words. God used that to teach me and to grow my faith. In my limited thinking, I saw Jack and the need. I saw Jack's need. But God really dropped in my heart. I see a school. I see hundreds of kids. I see an opportunity to grow the faith of many, including you, Mom.
Mhm.
God really, really used that to grow my faith, to challenge my faith. A lot of the kids started saying, we're going to pray. He says this word and this word and this word. And they started like 4-syllable words, And as he started, I mean, he really did. I really credit this to prayer of an entire school and to therapy because we did have therapists coming every week. And so Jack really started increasing his vocabulary. And I started to feel my faith rising. And so I challenged my students, like, let's not just pray for words. Let's start praying for phrases. And then we moved to, let's start praying for sentences. Some of my sixth graders now, who were a lot younger when this story was taking place, they still remember. And when they come, now I'm in the library. Now, when they come, they ask, is Jack still saying new words? What new words is Jack saying? And every time my heart just melts and I cry to think, they remember. They remember my boy. They remember my need. And it's really humbling and really special to be a part of God zooming out and showing me it's so much bigger than just me.
I love that so much because we are humans and we can only take in so much and we can only realize how things are affecting us. But
Yeah.
then when we really do give it to God, it's amazing what he can do with it and how he had a plan all along to touch all these other people that we just didn't
Yes.
have in mind. We didn't have the capacity to be able to have in mind.
Yes. I think of Isaiah 53, and I'll need my glasses because I can't see it without my readers. And Isaiah 53, verse 10. Isaiah 53 is usually known as the suffering servant chapter. It talks all about Jesus. And verse 10 says, "But it was the Lord's good plan to crush him and fill him with grief." And reading that through the lens of grief, it was God's plan to crush Jesus. It was God's plan to fill him with grief. And he called it good. And obviously, as the recipients of that plan, I call that good. Yes, eternal life, salvation, the healing and deliverance and joy and all the things that we receive because of Christ. Yes, I would call that good. But as a mom, if I were Mary in that moment watching him die, I don't know that I would have called it good. And so there's been seasons of my life, dad dying and Jack's diagnosis, and even other things that have come up with Jack through the years. In the moment, I would not call that good. I call it everything but good. Call it lots of things. But now I can look back and say, that was good. Now that I can zoom out, that was good. Your plan was good. God has used Jack over and over and over to teach me, to grow me. Our family is better because of him. And so now I can call that good.
Oh, so your most recent book is Grief is More Than Gray.
Hmm.
And just reading the cover of that book, I think that you're really thoughtful with your words, just in how you describe that book. Is there that type of feeling throughout the book, just really thoughtful and
Yes,
kind of
I
like
tried.
perspective type imagery, I
Yes,
guess?
I really tried to weave in a little bit of my story, a little bit of Daddy's, a little bit of Jack's, and all the perspectives, but also weave in what does the Bible say. And so each chapter is a different kind of grief because I'm just really not a fan of the 5 stages of grief. I don't think there's stages. I don't think there's a checklist. I think it's a circle that you keep looping through. And so I really tried to bring in what does the Bible say when we have angry grief? Because there are people in the Bible who were grieving and they were mad and they asked God big, tough questions, Job and Jeremiah, like, why? What are you doing? Now, they didn't always get an answer, but I love that it's in there because it's God giving us permission to have those big feelings. He is God of everything or he's God of nothing. And so if he can't handle my emotions, what are we doing? What am I doing? I feel like it's okay to have those emotions. Obviously, we can't stay in anger and live there forever, but when I was disappointed, when I was angry and thinking, God, you could have healed daddy and you didn't, and why? I still don't have the answer to why, but I'm okay with it now. I think it's okay to give God all those really big feelings. So in the angry chapter, I bring in what does the Bible say about anger when I'm feeling really worried and anxious and grieving over Jack's future, because that's a different type of grief. What does the Bible say about worry? What does the Bible say about anxiety? I pulled in a little story that I think applies when Jesus and his family they go to the temple and then they leave and the whole caravan they're all gone and Mary and Joseph suddenly realize where's Jesus? Where's Jesus? Where's Jesus? The Bible says she was frantic. Frantic. If I lost my child, I would be frantic too. That's an anxious grief. And I've never until I walked what I walked with Jack and actually lost him once in Florida. That's not a fun story.
That's a whole other story.
Yes, but I now it's like all you just read the Bible with a different lens because of our experiences. And so reading that story again is like, oh, she lost him. I always read it from his perspective. He had to be about his father's work. And wow, at such a young age, he's, speaking and talking to all the people in the temple. But meanwhile, mama is having a come apart,
Yeah.
like rushing back. I lost my child. Where's my kid? That is an anxious grief. And so it's a funny part in the story because I think, like, if she would have been around today, she probably would have ordered like those backpack leashes for Jesus to just keep like, don't ever do that again. I imagine him getting in trouble. Like, ah. So I try to weave in a little bit of me, a little bit of Jack and Daddy, but also a little bit of what does the Bible say when we're feeling this way? And then at the end, I offer just a chance to really reflect, to bring in you, to bring in the reader. What are you thinking? What are you feeling? Are you anxious about something? The walk to Emmaus, they said we had hoped. I asked the reader to think, fill in the blank. What do you hope for? What had you hoped for that didn't happen? I think it's really good to just get all that up and out because if it stays in, it festers and it's not good.
I agree. And I think about God as, in fact, a pastor told my kids this once when they were little and they were going through something. He said, you can tell God anything because he has really big shoulders.
Yep.
And I will never forget that because I think that's where we get ourselves into these feelings of bleakness and depression, and there
Yes.
is no way out, and I'm way down in the bottom of the pit.
Mm-hmm.
The reason is because I think a lot of times is because we are like nervous to really tell God what we really think of him right now.
Yes.
But God can handle it. And
Mm-hmm.
if you give it to him, he has this amazing way of pointing you just to the right scriptures and knowing exactly how to comfort you and
Yes.
bringing those people around you who are going to have a word for you from
Mm-hmm.
him that's going to comfort you and bring peace upon you in ways that you never imagined. But if you never take the time to tell him, listen, God, I'm
Yes.
hurting right now, then you haven't yet asked him to come and minister to your needs.
Yeah. I agree completely. I put this in the book. It is not my analogy. I heard it somewhere, but they say that grief is like a big hole in your living room. When you're grieving something, it's like suddenly there's a big hole in your living room. And in the beginning, you're just not you're not in that rhythm and so you fall in a lot. You just fall in and everything triggers. I'm sure when your mom passed, just that first year there's a lot of things that just push you into the hole in the living room. As time goes on, you learn to navigate and adjust. The hole never goes away. I think it's important. I love that about this analogy is that grief never goes away. That really awful feeling of, I miss them so much. That never goes away, but you learn to navigate and walk around the hole. I think with Jesus, when people fall in the hole, they're afraid to say, I'm in the hole. I'm in the hole. And I don't think God always wants to pull us out. I think he climbs right in with us. I think he gets down there with us, the road to Emmaus. He walked alongside them, whether they knew it or not. I think he climbs in that hole with us and says, I'm right here. And when you're ready, we'll climb out together. I love that analogy. I'm sorry, I don't know who to give credit to.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. I can so resonate with that as well. Well, good. Well, Misty, any final words that you'd like to give today?
I would just want to tell all your listeners to let go of the timeline. Let go of the timeline. Let go of what you thought grief was. Give yourself permission to grieve in the way that you need for as long as you need. And on the other side of that coin, you can't tell people how to grieve. You can't judge their grief. Just let it be. I think a lot of people struggle with when someone's grieving. I don't know what to say. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. Just be there. Just to say, I'm sorry and I care, I think is the most meaningful thing.
Thank you so much for joining us today. And listener, if you have a story you'd like to share on God's Power Stories, or you'd like me to read it, feel free to just let me know by dropping something in the comments or sending me an email. I know that I would love to hear it, and I'm sure our other listeners would too. Hey, real quick. If this episode blessed you in some way, I'd love it if you leave a written review for the show over on Apple Podcasts. These are like gold to me. Reviews help me know what you enjoy while providing insight on what you want to learn about. Also, take a screenshot of a review or this episode so that you can share it on your Facebook or Instagram stories. For Facebook, tag me at Anna Moore Bradfield Author. For Instagram, use Anna Moore Bradfield. When I share you back in my stories, both our lights will shine a little brighter. May you witness God's power in your life today, my friend.